Good afternoon, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship at Laguna Beach. This week, we're looking at Homestretch. We're we're in part 2 of 4, and it's a book by a good friend of our fellowship, Reverend Dr. Tom Owen-Towle. And just quick background for those who haven't read the book. When he wrote this book, he was just retiring. He was about 67 years old at the time. Now he's 81 years old. And in chapter 4, the title of chapter 4 is Seeking Curious Explorers to the End. I'm sorry, yes. Seeking
Curious
Curious
searchers.
Explorers to the End.
Searchers.
Curious Searchers to the End. And at the beginning of chapter 4, Reverend Tom talks about too much rest, R-E-S-T. Too much rest ends up spelling rust. So he says that one of the things that are important in the home stretch is not becoming too settled in the new phase of life. And another thing that he points out that I thought was worth noting is that we grow forward, and he says we have to continually in a never-ending way grow forward. And he shares a couple of stories. He shares about personally not knowing his grandfathers, and he talks about both of his grandfathers and from what he did know of them, how they resided in him, and his experience of becoming a grandfather himself, and some trepidation that he had in the experience of becoming a grandfather. And then he talks about one of the cool traditions that he has created with his 6 grandkids, and he's actually talked about it some in the visits. At the time that he wrote his book, he had only done it twice, which was at 10 years old. He allows his grandkids to choose where they're going to go, and he takes them on a week-long trip, him and his wife. So his first grandchild, he shares the story and the excursion that they took to New York City. His grandson was a baseball fan, so they went to 3 very historic ballparks in New York, Philadelphia, and Boston. They did things of culture in New York City. And then he shares an experience that he had in Costa Rica with his second grandchild, his granddaughter. And the things that she wanted to do in Costa Rica were personal challenges for him. She wanted to go ziplining, and he has a fear of heights. And he talks about why he had a fear of heights. And I can't remember the other activity, and I didn't make a note. But in having to challenge himself to engage in the activities that his granddaughter wanted to do, that his wife didn't have any fears or phobias about, he had to overcome his fears. And so he turned it into an activity with his granddaughter. And on page 56, he talks about a deal that he made with her. And it's not 100% clear if it was written or if it was oral, but there's a whole like contract that they make that says that he's going to face his fears, and he's going to go ziplining. And it was whitewater rafting was the second activity, and he has a fear of water from a drowning incident from when he was a child. And in doing that with his grandchild, he challenged her to, because he was going to go through, which he did, and face his fears. He challenged her, and she's 10 years old, as she goes through life, to remember that she has a compact with him to face her fears as they come up. And he felt that created a bond and a promise to comfort one another between them in their respective fears going through it. So I thought that was worth noting, and a very cool aspect of what was going on in chapter 4. And then moving on to chapter 5 with the title Savoring Still Astonished, he begins that with the mystery of life. And talking about the mystery of life, he he uses some wonderful language. Um, During the home stretch, we begin to concede that life consists not so much of problems to be solved as mysteries to be savored. And then we we were born in mystery, dwell in the midst of it, and submit to it upon death. Our mission as afternooners is one of the terms for those who haven't read the book. Afternooners is one of the terms he uses for people in the retirement age in the home stretch, is to probe and plumb the wonders of existence, to suck the marrow of life dry, reveling in every last drop. And one of the cool themes in chapter 5 that I thought was the key to becoming a persistent savorer, a savorer of life during life's home stretch appears to lie in the art of staying awake. And he gives some wonderful illustrations on page 73. The spirit of a wondrous life. Thank you for another day, a blessing I did not earn. May I become an unfettered beholder throughout my waking hours. Open my eyes that I might see, open my ears that I might hear, open my nostrils that I might smell, open my mouth that I might taste, open my throat that I might croon, open my hands that I might touch, open my soul that I might entertain, marvels exceeding comprehension and mysteries eluding capture. And all of that is used as allegory and instruction on staying awake. He says it's important that when death finds you, it finds you alive. Um, it talks about how many people, as they get into that final stage that he warns against, too much rest spells rust, and they rest themselves into the final moments of their life, rusting along the way. So it's about moving. And he says there's a cartoon showing an elder on a dance floor with the following caption: I'm getting into swing dancing. However, not totally on purpose. Some parts of my body are just prone to swinging. And he talks about how that affects him and the things that he does that are his ways of swinging and keeping himself active, which are tennis, magic, and singing. And tennis, magic, and singing, he talks about one of the reasons that he engages in magic is for the movement that it gives him in his hands to combat the arthritis. And so again, it's working against the rust. And so he reports in chapter 5 that the magic and the dexterity movements required in perfecting the magic tricks, which he goes into some detail about how he enjoys performing for elementary school children, and he dreams. We have to ask Reverend Tom next time he's with us if it's come to be about creating an elder magic show and doing some elder magic on his circuit. And to the best of my recollection, in the visits over the past 5 years, I don't remember Reverend Tom doing any magic for us on any of his visits. So we might have to get him to do some magic for us as well. But he, and the last thing that I wanted to share with you in terms of a recount of chapter 5 is he talks about the Buddha and the Buddha's journey, and how the Buddha tried to walk along the middle path. And he points out that the Buddha was not ever espousing a life completely free of want or desire, or free of problems or stress, but it was one of unattachment to the things that allow want and desire to become a problem for us. And he talks about how his mother embodied that. And there was a a cool term that he said that he learned when he was in Zimbabwe, and where is it? I thought it was worth sharing with you guys. And
Um, yeah, Zimbabwe.
parts of my body. It's spelled Rufaro. And since I'm reading it and creating my own pronunciation, I'm going to apologize if this has been.
It's on page 73, fourth paragraph.
Yes, Rufaro, a profound and abiding sense of contentment. Thank you for pointing me to that right page number. Rufaro, a profound and abiding sense of contentment. And he talks about that with the Buddha. He uses an illustration of Mary Magdalene and ties it in that when Mary Magdalene sees Jesus after he is raised from the dead, he tells her, I can't recall the exact words that are in the language, but the instruction is, don't be attached to me, because he's not permanent and he was going into another phase, and the attachment would be what the Buddha would be warning against, because that's only going to bring us turmoil and strife within the journey if we become too attached to any particular thing. And he just gives illustration how his mother, Mary Catherine Flanagan Toll, she was a very enlightened woman, and he says that she never strayed. Neither highs nor lows appeared to rattle his mom's spiritual cage, and he attributes her behavior to what's listed in Philippians 4:11. I have learned in whatsoever state I am in therewith to be content. Um, it's also noted that he points out that movement and the instruction of the cartoon, which is uh, to let different parts of yourself swing and to stay active and to stay engaged. He talks about how one of the best-selling books in the 1990s was Sexuality Over 60, and he touches on how sexuality is also and continues to be an important part. He points out how in language, a young sexually active man is referred to as a stud, and an older sexually engaged or active man might be referred to as a dirty old man, and how in language there's different stigmas and things attached that he's encouraging us to break and reconfigure in our mind as we move forward. And so that's a recap of what happens in chapters 4 and 5. And so I'll start with a general discussion question and open it up to our Zoom audience. We are missing the technology piece, which we're going to rectify, of the iPad in the sanctuary. So it makes us challenging to have a full interaction, especially with me remote. But I'm going to ask our Zoom audience this question. So engage in this material. I know some of you have read it and some of you haven't. And for those that haven't read it, listening to the summary, in your own journey, does this bring anything up to you? Are there thoughts that you had reading chapters 4 and 5 that came up for you that you might want to share with us that might help us illustrate or understand some of the things there? I see your hand, Carolyn. I'm coming to you first.
Yeah, Dawn, there was a paragraph that I read that I could so relate to. It's by the philosopher Horace Callan, and it says, there are persons who shape their lives by the fear of death, and persons who shape their lives by the joy and satisfaction of life. The former live dying, the latter die living. I know that fate may stop me tomorrow, but death is an irrelevant contingency. Whenever it comes, intend to die living. And
so if you would tell us why that connects with you, Carolyn. Why is that paragraph meaningful?
because it describes me.
And you're one of our senior members on
87.
87 years old.
Yep.
And so for the younger generation, one of the things he talks about is generativity, which is the act of guiding and directing the next generation. Um, were there any thoughts or recollections that came up in that vein for you?
Well, the last sentence, which is make sure that when you die, you are living life to its fullest. You know, don't feel sorry for yourself, and sitting in a chair is the worst thing you can do. Get out, keep moving. And, you know, I of course, you've heard this many, many times, but diet, exercise, and the right frame of mind. It sounds easy, but it isn't.
Well, thank you so much, Carolyn, for sharing that. Diet, exercise, and the right frame of mind are some of the extra tips from, what is that, octogenarian? Is that the proper term for someone?
That's what I am. Yep.
So from a thriving octogenarian. And so I open it up to anyone else that might have a thought on chapters 4 and 5, staying curious explorers. I see you, Noreen. Let's go to Miss Noreen. What do you got?
Well, you know, he was talking a bit about legacy when he was writing about his efforts with his grandkids. You know, and I know that that's something the next generation should make us step up to our game a little more. You know, we're putting something out there that can build their lives, make their lives better. So, you know, for me, this is kind of a time to do, you know, things to show them where family came from and to support them in what, you know, what they're doing now. They're older kids now. But I like what he did when they were young kids. We've been fortunate to travel. With our grandkids, I wanted to share a slogan that I think it was my father-in-law had. Somebody gave him on a birthday. It was, better to wear out than to rust away.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Well, thank you for sharing, Noreen. One of the things that you just made me think of that I was reflecting on when I was reading chapters 4 and 5 is where he started talking about different aspects of grandparenting, and he acknowledged that there are different people that are have a problem relationship with either their children or their grandkids and aren't able to have that relationship. And then there's what we'll call alternate grandparenting relationships, what made me think of you, Carolyn, and the granddoggies, right? Because he talked about the purpose of being connected and having that connection and that energy and touching and just playing and being in the moment. And that can be achieved with grand doggies and grand kittens or grand cats, and I guess a grand snake or a grand ferret, if that's what is in the menu. And then I also was thinking and remembering one of the shares of recent past from Jean, and how Jean Paris is talking about one of her purposes and her things is being able to see certain milestones and staying around because certain things are right around the corner, and he talks about those kinds of anticipations. And so again, apologies for the challenge with the technology. I would love to engage the sanctuary and get some accounts and discussion from those who are in the building, and I'm not exactly sure how to do it effectively so that we can hear it, except for Thomas, come up to the laptop, and if you come all the way to the laptop, that may actually work.
Well,
hold on. If maybe you turn off the speaker also on the laptop, the sound on the laptop all the way down, Tom.
Could
can
he
you
go
hear me?
to the pulpit?
Yes.
All
No.
right. So I just thought if anybody here wanted to talk, they could come sit at this chair. If you could turn that down a little, yeah. If somebody wanted to come up and talk, I like what, I haven't read those chapters, but I like the idea. Greg and I, as a gay couple, do not have children or grandchildren, but we have a lot of nieces and nephews. And we've spent a lot of time bonding with them, taking them on adventures, kind of like what Tom Owen-Towle was doing with his daughter that went to Costa Rica. So in fact, that's part of our RV trip is to visit as much of the family as possible. And when my mom passed and the whole family met for a week to have the celebration of life, it was really great just to reconnect with everybody. So yeah, connecting with all the people in our lives, connecting with the next generation, and my nieces and nephews now have kids, and so we're connecting with them. It's really very important, and it sounds like that's what he was talking about in these chapters. Does anybody else here want to say something by standing up, by coming over here? Here comes Linda.
Well, thank you for orchestrating this for us, Tom. Let's see what Linda has for us.
There wasn't much to orchestrate. I just had to sit in a chair.
I can sit in the chair. Hi.
Hi, Linda.
One of the things that Tom talks about is his birthday, which is October 13th. My birthday is half past October, which is October 15th. So I really identified with that part of chapter 5 and his anticipation of that date. And he talks about the month of October and the things that he looks forward to during that month. And I like that very much. There you go.
Did you have that in common with him, Linda? The anticipation of the events that he mentioned in
Yes,
October,
yes.
Halloween?
Yes, Halloween's a big deal in my life. Halloween's a great deal in my life. And Thanksgiving and on to Christmas, and there you go. So to stay engaged during those holiday events is important to me. My grandmother, my mother and I were born on the same day, October 15th. I never understood why they thought they were older than I was, but there you go again. I like Reverend Tom very much. I like what he has to say, and I like his writings very much. So thank you for doing this, Don. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for sharing with us, Linda. Is there anyone else in the fellowship that is able to make it up and share with us?
Hold on. Let me mute it.
Thank you, Tom. So one of the things that Tom was illustrating, and Reverend Tom touches on it, but it's important, is that all of our relationships are not necessarily linear biological relationships where we're actually the biological grandparents. There's aunt and uncle relationships, and there's also non-biological relationships where we step in, and in the season of life that we are in, if you're in the home stretch season and you have one of these relationships, it's a relationship of affinity. The term is the family of affinity. So if you have a relationship, whether it be with a young person that's a niece or a nephew, or connected to you in a meaningful way where you're creating these experiences, the thing that it's a cultivated, he doesn't call it this, but he's creating a cultivated experience. And what Noreen pointed out in her comments was that's a legacy and thoughtful cultivation of taking a week of time, going to a place that is a different location than the child's used to. One of the other things he talks about is the thoughtfulness of for his grandchildren that weren't local to San Diego. He brought them to San Diego from, I think they were in Seattle and Washington. But he brought them to San Diego. So one, they could get an experience of what it was like where their grandparents were from, but also to cultivate that week-long experience and build that relationship. So it exists in our journeys, and it's just worth pointing out that it goes beyond our actual biological connections, because we do have that family of affinity. And what we ultimately, what I see, what I feel that I have, and what I've experienced in the fellowship here in Laguna Beach is that family of affinity. And we didn't talk about it in the announcements, but I'll remind everybody now, tomorrow at noon, Paul, who is doing our Zoom tech, and thank you, Paul, and thank you, Oakley, for making the service happen on the fellowship side. It's very important for all the parts and everyone who's contributed to making this happen. I say thank you. But we are, for me, a family of affinity. And tomorrow, Paul Bogdan, our in-house Zoom tech today, he curates our Zoom at noon. And what happens is, most importantly, is everybody checks in and checks on how everybody else is doing on a weekly basis. And that has gone on different dates and in different ways. Before it was on Zoom, it was in person, and it moved around. It was in Laguna Woods. And it's a connection that we have, and we're getting to know so much more about one another through that connection. So for me, it's a family of affinity, and I actually, being a person that is not in my home stretch, feel like I greatly benefit from some of these connections that I'm talking about that aren't biological, that I've been able to have with different members of this particular community. So I express my gratitude in this moment and in this community. So as we come to a close and we invite Carol to lead us in our closing song, I remind everyone that next week we're going to be looking at chapters 6 and chapter 7. And so no requirement to do any homework or do any reading, because I'll do my best to do a recap and to do a highlight for everyone. But we're going to do chapter 6 and chapter 7. And so now I invite Carol to come